Welcome back to the People's Basics, where we come once again to be celebrating our movement for the universal basics of income, services, and rights. Today on the program, we're going to be doing another Commoner's Corner segment where we try to talk to you, the members of our community, about what you think the fundamental purpose of government's role to its people is, and frankly, the methods of advocacy you think are going to help us get there the fastest or the most impactfully. So, with us today on the program, we're going to be talking to Danny Anderson. You may recall him from our previous debates we held back during the presidential election, where we had a bunch of people representing the different candidates. Danny represented Joe Biden at that time. And so he's coming back onto the program today to be able to talk not about Joe Biden's politics, but a little bit more of his own. And so in today's episode, we're going to be focusing, as we always do, on the basic role of government to its people. But we're also going to be talking about one of his passion issues, which is sortition, where people, randomly select who should be the representative. And so we'll see if it's a pure sortition or if there's a specific model in play. But without any further ado, let's bring on Danny Anderson to the program. Danny, welcome to the People's Basics.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here. I'm Danny Anderson. I'm from Virginia, and I'm the president of the College Democrats at the University of Richmond. And as that might suggest, my political affiliation is a Democrat. But even as such, I have a lot of my own ideas. And sortition is one of those that I'm very passionate about. And I'd love to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And so, Danny, in terms of sortition, I think there's going to be some mixed knowledge of what that truly entails. I obviously gave a little bit of an intro of what it's kind of known as. It's a lottery-based system. But can you talk to me about what is the form of sortition that you are looking to try and advocate for?
Sure. So first, if you don't mind, John, I'll give a little background. So sortition is actually, I would argue, the oldest form of democracy. It's not in ancient Athens. They teach you in school that they had this direct democracy where everyone sort of votes on everything, and that's sort of all they do. Well, that's not quite the truth. You see, the reality is they only got together once a month as a general public, but they actually had over 1,100 administrative offices that did most of the policymaking. And of those 1,100, over 1,000 were not chosen by election, but by lottery.
Mm.
And that's because the Greeks believed that elections were an oligarchical tool. They believed it was parentalist, that it basically gave the aristocrats a chance, the people who could speak most eloquently, who had the most resources, who had the highest status in the community, to get into power. Whereas lottery was a way to create true democracy, where normal people were equally represented. And then following their example in ancient Rome, after the patrician minority had control of the Roman Senate for much of the same reason, the plebeian majority created a tribunate, which actually gained a lot of power over time, and was a way for the plebs to be represented equally in the Roman government. So this has actually been a tool of democratization for as long as democracy has existed. And I think we would be well served by replacing our existing Congress with a lottery. And just the reason for doing this, to begin with, is that the political advantage of wealthy people in this country has become enormous. And I don't need to tell the people on this show that the system is broken. People on the left especially keep complaining that the government doesn't represent them. They keep saying, "Oh, well, maybe if I do my activism a little harder, then we'll magically replace the majority of Congress with socialists, and we'll get Medicare for all, and we'll get the Green New Deal, and all these other things I want." And the reality is that Congress doesn't represent the people well enough to do the kinds of change that we're demanding. So this kind of moment requires us to think more deeply about what government should be. Should it be that the people of highest status are in charge of our society, or should it be that we are? And I think this is a universal political right that any people should have, to be in charge of their own society.
I think there's a lot of interesting debate on this subject. I don't actually know completely where I stand because I do see some pros and cons. Like to your point about some of the pros, you're obviously correct in saying that there's a major influence that financial status has on one's ability to run for office and run for office successfully. Anyone who's run for office knows that it's not just the expenses of trying to run a campaign, but you are taking time away from likely doing some work that you would otherwise be doing that was providing for an income. Now, yes, some candidates can pay themselves a salary from their campaigns, but more often than not, it requires people to dip into savings in order to be able to run for office. So I do agree with you on that point. But I do wonder, in terms of like the applicability to this sortition, are you advocating for this on all levels, or would it be just federal? I want to first clarify before I get into some of the concerns I have.
So I support it on all levels, but today my proposal is just to replace the federal Congress with a lottery with all the same powers and duties it currently has. And this delegation would be 3 times larger so that it can be more perfectly representative. It would be stratified to guarantee approximate proportionality based on race, income, gender, and age, to guarantee that all those groups are equally represented in a way that they are not now. And then they'd only serve 1 2-year term and would be then replaced by a subsequent lottery, such that they, leave politics afterwards and have no incentive to get chosen again.
So I guess my question would be like, obviously, there's going to be a little bit more uh, dependence on random chance of where the ideological bend of the country kind of lies. How do you try to take that into effect of people maybe not feeling represented? Because, like, are you going to also have ideology as a thing that you factor into that weighting as well? And if so, does that not like kind of stratify like very defined ideological terms? Like, how do you think we can get it to that point? Because one of the appeals of representative democracy is that people do feel like whoever is supposed to be in there, at least in theory, represents the majority of their area. This may not have people feel like they're getting that direct representation or having a specific representative that's directly tied to themselves. How do you try to, address people's concerns on that?
So, first of all, I'd say that much of partisanship can be predicted by race, income, gender, and age. So, to that extent, it does help sort of even out the odds of people from each ideology being chosen. But I'd add to that, I think when you have, over 1,000 members of this new Congress, it would be very unlikely that we'd have an unrepresentative sample of ideology just based on law of large numbers. So I think that concern is mostly alleviated just by that.
Okay. And so let me go to the next concern, which is, obviously right now, it's people who are motivated to run for office and serve in these roles who are running. You could argue whether or not they are really motivated once on the inside to actually legislate and stuff, but they want the position enough to run. In this sortition model, is it going to be only people who like apply? Is it just random anyone who wants it, like kind of like a jury duty? How are you kind of envisioning that?
So it's completely voluntary to serve if you're randomly selected from a list of all citizens. And the reason we do it that way is because we don't want to force people to do anything. We can't force them to try very hard. We can't force them to put effort into educating themselves. But John, I think people would take the job very seriously once they agree to do it, because there's a large body of academic work showing that people, once they have a civic duty, they may be very unhappy to take it in the beginning, but once they have it, they take it very seriously, and they're willing to put in a lot of effort to do what they think society expects of them. So I'd add to that think similar experiments have been done in Ireland and other places where a citizens' assembly has been created with much the same process as I'm describing. And they've gotten together to decide things like abortion, climate change, term limits in Ireland. And it's actually been very successful. people took it seriously. They came out with concrete proposals, and on abortion, they were actually instituted the current policy there. So I'm very optimistic that people will take it seriously.
So then I guess my last question on this, where I have a concern, is general accountability. So right now, through our representative democracy, we hopefully, when we don't like what our people are doing in office on our behalf, we have the ability to defeat them in a future election. In this system, it seems like it's a little bit more one and done. You are selected, and therefore you do not have necessarily the same choice to run for re-election. Could you elaborate upon how do you hold people accountable when they could potentially just get lobbied while they're in Congress and potentially come out with a high lucrative paying job if they do what corporate interests want them to do?
Sure. So first of all, I would support having a very powerful inspector general's office to make sure that improprieties like that do not happen. But moreover, I think, John, I don't have to tell the viewers of this show that this already happens in existing Congress.
Yeah.
And it happens very often, specifically because of the accountability mechanism works better for corporations who have time to research everything the candidates have done, that have time to lobby people and to donate to campaigns. It works better for the corporations that are trying to corrupt our politicians than for the people that actually should be holding them accountable. Our accountability system is completely broken. And that's why I'm suggesting not improving accountability with the system, but actually replacing it with directly putting us in charge. And that is a more fundamental move than just improving an accountability mechanism. You know, we can keep regulating campaign finance all we want, but ultimately, you know, we don't have the level of information required to hold our representatives meaningfully accountable under the current system. This changes all of that.
So let's now talk about some of the goals of, let's say, the system that we achieve. We've been talking about sortition, but we always want to hear more holistically what our guests think is that basic responsibility of government to its people. If we can achieve this more representative system, what do you think they're supposed to be representing? What do you think government is supposed to be doing as its duty to its people?
Well, I think it's about what government is. And government is the people. And I don't think right now our government reflects that. So at the most basic level, I think government has a responsibility to turn the wishes of the people into policy. And I think the system accomplishes that in a much more efficient way than any election can.
So essentially, I mean, that is kind of a very purely democratic view. It's not that specific aims. It's supposed to just be representative of the people. I think that's a really noble cause. So let me ask you, do you support models like direct democracy as well? Or would you have the continuation of just the purely representative model, but just with the switch to a sortition-based election system?
Sure. So direct democracy, like, for example, referenda and initiative, I am much more skeptical of. You know, we saw with the Uber referendum in California where they tried to deny their own employees health care with an initiative. We saw that they won very easily because they outspent the opposition by a factor of something like 100 to 1, because they just had so much more money behind their campaign. And so even though it was an incredibly unpopular policy in the beginning, just enough advertising, enough messaging got them 70% of the vote in that initiative, and they were able to deny their workers insurance. So in my view, it's reprehensible to think that you know, initiative is a way to govern effectively. There's no deliberation between the people. It still maintains all the problems of voting disparities where, you know, the elderly, the white, the rich, and the men tend to dominate. So I don't think it's a long-term solution.
So that confuses me just a bit because, I mean, the model of sortition is to kind of put it out to the more general public, those who can't normally afford to run for office. the ballot initiative kind of does a very similar task in trying to get direct citizens access to the policy making. And I would ask, yes, there is this one example of a ballot initiative that you're citing, but that money is to popularize the issue, and therefore you're then representing the people again on their wishes. You can argue about corporate finance all day and whether they should be able to influence our politics to the degree they do, but I mean, that's where the sentiment lies. You were ending up representing the people, and there are plenty of other ballot initiatives around the country, from raising the minimum wage to legalizing marijuana to legalizing a bunch of other things that are on ballot initiatives as well that have been passed successfully. So I'm trying to square these two things because it does seem like you're trying to break free of the needing to elect a person who will then do your wishes and trying to go straight to the people on their wishes. How do you square those two things?
Well, I think in sortition, you end up with a much more informed voter group, first of all, because you have people who are working full time to understand and solve these problems. Where in initiative or referenda, you sort of go to the people for approval on something that they often don't completely understand. And Brexit is another big example of this. But I think it solves the problem of the information gap much better than any referendum or election does, right? Because I'm not saying that initiative and referendum are worse than electoral processes. So I'm not against them in the current system, but I am saying that sortition solves an additional problem of full equality and of informed voter group.
Okay, that's fair enough. So, Danny, I want to ask, we're at the end of our time. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the People's Basics audience? Or, as I like to give every guest I have on the opportunity, do you have any questions that you want to ask me as we wrap up today's episode?
Well, I'd just like to offer, John, that, if you're watching this show and you're some kind of anarchist, socialist, communist, I've seen them all, who thinks that the system is not working for us, I think you can do better than, than asking for reforms to the election process that might hopefully someday, just maybe, get more honest people into office. I think that we can guarantee people equality. We can guarantee people equal political power. We can guarantee that government will represent the people all in one move. And that's why I think this needs to be a movement in the United States. It doesn't have to be the Congress all at once. Maybe first it's the school board. Maybe first it's the board of supervisors of your county. But this is something that has a lot of potential. And I hope you'll think about it in the future.
Yeah, I do think that's probably where it's going to have its first use cases. I'd love to see some more examples of data in the US. So locally doing it for school boards and such. I think, yeah, that would be a very interesting idea to explore. But Danny, I want to thank you for coming on today to be able to share your thoughts and be able to talk about a subject that we don't get to talk about a lot in Sortition. So thank you again, man, for coming on.
Thank you so much, John. Have a good day.
You're welcome. Okay, everyone. So that was Danny Anderson, and I hope you all will continue to look onto this subject. As I acknowledged in this episode, I don't have an exact position on this yet. I have a lot of feelings both ways on this issue. I think there's some points that we didn't even get to talk to today about, like the cost of running elections. Sortition would be eliminating a lot of those costs as well. So I think it's a very interesting idea, and we want to thank Danny for coming on today to be able to talk about it. That being said, we want to encourage you all to come on and have your own conversations. If you check the description section down below, we include a link to our link tree, which has all of our links to join our community, as well as to sign up for an episode with our Calendly link. We want to also encourage you. We're trying to hit our subscriber goals. Every 1,000 subscribers, we're going to be doing a new fun thing to reward you all, the fans. So this time at 2,000, we're going to be doing a little karaoke, and it'll keep having new prizes every 1,000. So please make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you're always notified when we come out with new content Monday to Thursday, roughly every afternoon, sometime between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. So that being said, my friends, I hope you all have a great day out there. And as always, I hope you stay classy out there, my basic people.